Okay, so uh, picture this. You're having dinner with your family,
Yeah.
just laughing, telling stories, those moments we all treasure. And then suddenly, it's gone. A husband, a father, ripped away, imprisoned for something, a crime he swears he didn't commit. This is Richard Rosario's reality. And, well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. His story, as told in the podcast, 13 Alibis.
It's one of those stories that really makes you think, like, what do we really know about justice? Here's a man, not one, not two, but 13 people saying he was with us, placing him miles away from where it happened from the murder. But he's still there, behind bars, convicted, and kind of forgotten, really, by the system.
Yeah, and what gets me, it's not like, oh, I saw him around. These alibis, super detailed times, places, even conversations, and not just one person saying it, multiple people. Makes you wonder, how could this happen?
Well, that's what we're gonna try to figure out. We're going past the legal stuff, the court stuff, to really see what this did to people, the impact on Richard and his family, the fight to get him free, and how did the system even let this happen? Where did it go wrong?
Right, let's go back to the beginning, 1996. Richard Rosario, convicted of murder. Think about that. Ripped away from everything, knowing you're innocent, having proof, and nobody's listening.
A nightmare, really. And the podcast 13 Alibis, it doesn't shy away from how it felt. There's this scene, really powerful, where Richard's children, Amanda and Richard Jr., they go see him in prison.
Yeah, it's the first time they're really talking about, what it's been like, his being in prison. And
Yeah.
you can just hear the heartbreak when Amanda says, I don't even know how to say how I feel. Losing my dad, that's the worst thing that could happen.
And Richard, he says, it's different with us. It's not like I just walked out, I was dead. It's like another layer of awful, right? He didn't choose to be gone. He was taken.
Really shows you. Wrongful convictions, they don't just break one life. It spreads out, wives, kids, parents, siblings, everybody.
Totally. And it's not just feelings, right? It's money for lawyers, the way people look at you, never knowing what's next. It affects everything.
In this case, it just screams frustration with the legal system. Years, appeals, everyone a little bit of hope, and then bam, shut down. His lawyer, Rebecca Friedman, she filed a new motion, new evidence, strong stuff, and denied, without even a hearing.
Now, you're probably thinking, how's that even possible? See, to understand this, got look at the appeals process. Motion denied without a hearing basically means the judge said, nah, not important enough. No need to even look at the case again. They just, poof, dismissed it. Didn't even give Richard's lawyer a chance to argue her case.
Rebecca Friedman was, and I don't blame her, furious. She said, it's sad. They're dismissing Richard's life. This isn't just a name on a file.
And you can feel it, right? That frustration. And it speaks to this bigger problem. The system, sometimes it sees files, numbers, not people, families, futures hanging in the balance.
So where does that leave Richard? You'd think. Anger, despair, giving up? But no, Richard. He's defiant. He says, I'll die on my feet fighting for my freedom, for my children.
Powerful stuff, right? Sad, but powerful. 2 decades wrongly imprisoned and still hope. He believes justice will win. But you hear something different now, too. Not just that hope, there's a tiredness there, a feeling of defeat. You hear it in a quiet conversation with his wife after the denial.
It gets to you. Hearing the weight of all those years. But Richard's story, it's not over. His lawyers, they're filing another appeal. And this time, they're going big, challenging the system itself, its ability to admit it made a mistake.
Glenn Garber, one of his lawyers, he says it straight. Things are looking, well, bleaker than ever for Rosario. Will he ever get out? That question, it hangs over everything, a reminder of what's at stake.
So we've got a man who says, I'm innocent. 13 people backing him up. A family in pieces. And a system seemingly unable to fix itself. What now? What happens when the thing that should be protecting us fails this badly?
And that is a question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're going to look at as we keep going with this case. The legal stuff, the evidence, the systemic problems that have kept Richard Rosario locked up all this time. It really gets you thinking, right? Like, what would it even take for someone like Richard to be heard?
Yeah.
For the system to say, hey, we messed up.
That's the big question, isn't it? And 13 Alibis, they really get into that. It's not just about the fact of the case. It's about the people, how this has affected Richard and his family, the emotional side of it all.
Yeah, one thing that hit me hard was how Richard describes time in prison. He says it's like years just blur together, like a part of him died, even though he's still there. It's a scary thought, your life just vanishing while you're stuck in this cage of, well, injustice.
And it's not just Richard suffering. Imagine his kids growing up with their dad behind bars. Always that question, why? In the podcast, Richard Jr., he talks about getting ready for a visit, knowing he has to leave his dad there again. That anticipation, the short time together, and then that awful goodbye.
Just breaks your heart. And it shows you wrongful convictions, they cause this ripple effect of trauma, not just for the person who's wrongly imprisoned, but families, even future generations.
And then there's Richard's wife. She's the rock, isn't she? Holding everything together, visiting Richard, fighting for him year after year, all while dealing with the money problems, the emotional drain, everything.
Shows you the power of love, right?
Yeah.
Loyalty, so many setbacks, but she keeps going for her husband, for her family. A good reminder that these cases, it's not just legal stuff. There are real people, real lives getting turned upside down.
But even with all that, there's this little glimmer of hope. That new appeal his lawyers filed, the one challenging, well, the whole appeals process itself.
A long shot for sure, like David and Goliath. They're basically saying the system failed Richard at every step. New evidence, strong arguments, and the courts, they just keep shutting it down, not even a hearing.
So what's different about this appeal? Why is it not like the others?
They're going after the structure, saying, we get it, there needs to be a process, but it's become so rigid, so stuck in its ways, it's actually preventing justice. They're saying the very things that should make it fair are keeping this wrongful conviction in place.
That's bold, going after the system itself. Do they have a chance?
Hard to tell. The odds are definitely not in their favor. But there's this growing movement, even among lawyers, to look at these flaws in the appeals process, to admit that sometimes new evidence needs a new look at a case.
So this is bigger than just Richard Rosario, then?
Exactly. It's about showing those cracks in the system, the ones that let wrongful convictions happen and then make them so hard to overturn. And that's why this deep dive, this conversation, it matters. It's not just one man and his fight. It's about all of us looking at the system, asking the tough questions, demanding better.
Feels like we're at this kind of turning point, doesn't it?
Right.
Richard Rosario saying he's innocent for over 20 years, all these people backing him up, and then the system just stuck, won't budge, even with more and more evidence that maybe they got it wrong.
Yeah, it's what they call tunnel vision. Once that decision's made, especially a big case like this, hard to turn back. They dig in even when there's, pretty clear evidence that maybe the story's not what they thought.
So can anything be done? Is this it for Richard? Or is there some way, something that can break through this?
Well, that's where, people knowing about it, that matters. Podcasts like this one, like 13 Alibis, they bring these stories out, show the human side of it, get people talking, maybe push for change.
Right, it's easy to get lost in the legal mumbo-jumbo.
Yeah.
But this is about a person's life. Richard Rosario, he's not a case number. He's a dad, a husband, someone who's had his freedom taken away.
And that's what makes this whole thing so important. It's not just about the law. It's about, thinking about these issues, really engaging with them.
So what can people listening do? What can they actually do to help in cases like this?
First thing, tell people. Talk about it. Friends, family, whoever. Share the podcast, post about it, whatever you do online. The more people who know about Richard Rosario, the more the system has to, pay attention.
Knowledge is power. Right. And for these wrongful convictions, that power's in getting the word out, demanding answers, shining a light on these things that too often nobody sees.
Exactly. And there are groups you can support. The Innocence Project, places like that. They give legal help, look into cases, try to change the laws that lead to these problems in the first place.
And remember, you don't got to be a lawyer to make a difference. Every voice matters. Every time you share, every conversation, it all adds up.
Richard Rosario's story, it shows us that fighting for justice, it never stops. Got to keep at it, stay committed, and be willing to, challenge the system when it forgets what it's supposed to be doing.
So as you go about your day, keep Richard's story in mind. Think about those flaws in our justice system, how hard it is to prove you're innocent, what these decisions do to real people. Don't let his story just fade away. Talk about it. Do something about it. Let's recommit to justice for everyone.
And that hope, that's powerful stuff, even when it seems impossible, even after years of, disappointment, believing that things can be right, that can keep us going, push us forward, and maybe, just maybe, make all the difference.